Hi everyone, welcome back to Horror Histories Club. This is episode number 5. Last week we looked at the Var Victorians. This week we are going to be looking at the Slimey Stewards. The rotten reign of Slimey James. This is a true story how Slimey James the first of the Stuart kings of England. So James's mum was Mary, Queen of Scots, and his dad was her otter of a husband, Lord Darnley. James had a rather troubled childhood. Soon after little Jim was born, his dad got bumped off following a mysterious explosion. Mary was accused of his murder. She ran off to England, leaving James behind. Her cousin, Queen Elizabeth, gave her a woeful welcome. She locked her up for 18 years. If that wasn't bad enough, she then had her executed. Meanwhile, Sonny Jim had been on the Scottish throne since it was won. James had been a rather nerdy king. His hobbies included reading Latin, writing books about witches, and picking his nose. Nerd or not, when Elizabeth I, who was the last of the Tudors, died, James was next in line for the English throne. Royal messengers went to Scotland to tell him the good news. He was crowned James I of England. The trouble was, James managed to get up everyone's noses. He was especially rude when he was asked to show his face in public. He also ruled England and Scotland at a troubled time. There were struggles between the two types of Christians: Catholics who thought the Pope should be head of the church, and Protestants who didn't, and they protested about it. James made laws against Catholics, so a bunch of Catholics, including Guy Fawkes, were so angry they decided to blow up the Houses of Parliament with the king inside. James was tipped off. The plot was foiled and the plotters were killed gruesomely. Many Protestants hated James too. Some decided to move to America to get away from him. James also persecuted witches because he thought they was out to get him. He also hated the latest English craze, smoking tobacco. In fact, he executed the man who introduced tobacco to England. When old Sonny Jim finally died in 1625, almost everybody was glad he was gone. James's son, Charles II, became king. But James's son Charles was even worse than James. In fact, he was so slimy and stupid that his own parliament declared war against him and cut off his head. Trial and terror. Witch trials were regularly held in Stuart villages and towns. Innocent women were put through far scarier things than any witch would do. Poor women, and sometimes even men, who were about to stand trial for witchcraft, were kept awake for days on end. This was to make sure that they were so tired that they would say anything the witchfinder wanted them to, including owning up to being a witch. Demonology was a book written by King James about witches. It was used in witch trials across the land as an instruction manual on how to be beastly to women. Children as young as 5 were called upon to tell stories about the women. The prosecutors encouraged them to make up any old nonsense. The weirder the better, just so long as it made the women seem wicked. Witches were supposed to keep demons or devils near them in the shape of animals called familiars. So scram, you soppy cat, you'll be the death of her. Stuart people believed that witches couldn't drown because water rejects evil. So women were tested by being dunked underwater. If they drowned, they were probably innocent and definitely dead. Pricking with needles was another terrible test used by witchfinders, as witches didn't bleed. These sneaky prickers had plenty of nasty tricks up their sleeve to make sure they didn't draw blood. And poor women probably wouldn't have bled anyway, as fear drains blood away from the skin. In Scotland, France and the rest of Europe, most women found guilty of witchcraft were burnt. However, in England, most were just hanged instead. The accused was sometimes weighed against two huge Bibles. If the woman was lighter, then she must be a witch. But the Bibles they used were massive. Talk about not balancing the books. Witchfinders would look all over women's bodies to find an odd lump or mark. Any mark would do, a wart, a mole, a birthmark, whatever. And these were supposed to be the extra nipple that witches used to feed the blood to their foul familiars. Right, that's it for Horrible Histories Club this week. Please tune in next week for the next episode. Thank you.